Hello viewers, the module which I am going to present now is titled Environmental Constituents of Public Policy Making. After reading this chapter, you will be able to explain the factors which influence public policy making, political, economical and cultural factors, basic assumptions and role of bureaucracy. Introduction. Most citizens continue to look to their local, provincial and federal governments to play a leadership role in finding workable and affordable solutions to the issues of the day. In turn, governments make decisions or form public policies that affect societal values, laws and regulations, the spending of tax dollars and the well-being of individuals, families and communities. For voluntary organizations dedicated to the betterment of society, the ability to influence the actions of government can be critical to achieve their mission. Voluntary sector leaders have successfully influenced government to include equality provisions for women in the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms and to create national strategies on AIDS, literacy, tobacco reduction and youth employment. Their efforts have resulted in crime and family violence prevention strategies, protection of the rights of children, of persons with disabilities and of the environment. The introduction of seat belt laws, smoking bylaws and drinking and driving prohibitions. Whether it is by monitoring government activities, advocating, lobbying or strategic partnering, those leaders who demonstrate they understand and can influence the public arena are better able to support those they serve. Public policy is a complex and multifaceted process. It involves the interplay of many parties. This includes many businesses, interest groups and individuals competing and collaborating to influence policymakers to act in a particular way and on a variety of policies. These individuals and groups use numerous tactics to advance their interests. The tactics can include lobbying, advocating their positions publicly, attempting to educate supporters and opponents, and mobilizing allies on a particular issue. Perfect policies rarely emerge from the political process. Most often, policy outcomes involve compromises among interested parties. When a business considers which policy to support and advocate for, considerations include what is in their best interest, that is, which policy could help the business achieve the greatest profits. Other considerations include the political feasibility of the policy, whether a majority of others will support the policy, and also how cost effective and efficient the policy would be in achieving the desired outcome. Equity is another consideration. Is the policy fair? Are the benefits from the policy equitably distributed and are the costs of the policy shared fairly? Public policies are influenced by a variety of factors. These factors include public opinion, economic conditions, new scientific discoveries, technological change, interest groups, non-governmental organizations, business lobbying and other political activities. Now coming to factors influencing policy making. As a result of the wide variety of influencing factors that tend to pull and push policy in different directions, public policy change often happens slowly. Absence of a crisis and sometimes even during a crisis, the influencing factors can tend to check and counteract each other, slowing the development and implementation of new policy and tending to lead to incremental rather than radical changes in public policy. And often the influencing agents are more effective in blocking policy change than in having new policies adopted, as has been the case with comprehensive climate change policy at the US federal level and resistance from some large energy companies. Public opinion. Public opinion and priorities have strong influence on public policy over time. relevant to sustainable businesses is the increasing public concern about environment, volatile energy prices, and global climate change. This is influencing public policy through electoral politics, citizen rallies, and actions that affect governmental decision makers. Also influencing public policy relevant for sustainable businesses are new scientific findings and information, such as new findings about climate change and the impact of human beings and businesses on climate change. Next, economic factors. Economic conditions also significantly affect the environment and operating context for businesses. The Great Recession at the end of the first decade of the 21st century enhanced interest and support for public investments and incentives that could help to create jobs. Next factor, technological change. Technological advancements, often motivated by market and business opportunities, also affect public policy. Technology is constantly changing, and this affects the business environment directly and also indirectly as public policies change with technological inventions. New, lower cost and easier to use technologies can increase public support for policies that promote renewable energy and energy efficiency and that reduce environmental damage. Next factor is interest groups. Interest groups include business and trade associations, professional organizations, labor unions, environmental advocacy organizations, and cause-oriented citizen groups and lobbies. Individuals and businesses also organize into associations and interest groups for other reasons than to try to influence government. Interest groups advocate for public policies that serve the desires of their members and further the mission of their organizations. For example, environmental interest groups supporting legislation to improve air quality by reducing carbon emission. Next factor, business associations. Business efforts to influence public policy and government include not only individual company efforts but also business and associations. These associations act collectively to promote public policies in the best interest of business in general and also in the interest of specific industries and localities. Next, coming to political, social and cultural factors. Political factors. Policy making takes place within greatly varying settings. Countries have different political systems and forms of government in addition to various social, cultural and economic systems and levels of development. Frame policies. These characteristics affect the way a policy problem is identified and prioritized, the process of its resolution and the actual results of policies and programs. As non-governmental organizations and the private sector become more distinct and truly independent of the government, the dynamics or policy development and implementation will also change. Social factors. Gender dynamics vary considerably around the world. For example, policy prescriptions related to girls' education or access to reproductive health services will vary according to women's participation in the social domain. Policy making differs whether the political situation is stable and the government is working according to business as usual or whether a crisis is precipitating rapid policy change. In his model of policy streams, Kingdom defines politics as wings in national mood. Vagaries of public opinion, election results, changes in administrations, shifts in partition or ideological distributions and interest group pressure. Legal factors. Influence of constitutional provisions. Judiciary creates new and reshapes old social policy. negates policy and establishes procedural policy. Cultural factors. Social settings and cultural practices can vary not only between countries but also within countries, affecting all components of the policy circle, as shown in a recent assessment of the status, issues, policies and programs related to adolescent and youth reproductive health care in 13 countries in Asia and the Near East, that included countries as diverse of Yemen in the Near East and Cambodia in Southeast Asia. The assessment concluded that adolescent youth in the Near East region is influenced in part by the traditional cultural and religious norms and values that pervade and dictate both family communication and national policy making. Next, coming to the role of bureaucracy in policy making process. Bureaucracy may be defined as the systematic organization of tasks and individuals into a pattern which can most effectively achieve the ends of collective efforts. According to Professor A. Wieg, it denotes the sum total of the personnel, apparatus and procedures by which an organization manages its work and achieves its purposes. In other words, it is a system of personnel administration under which all the employees are organized into hierarchy of officers, each with a well-defined sphere of duties and responsibilities. This is done in order to minimize chances of personal consideration in the performance of public duties and to increase efficiency by bringing technical mind to the solution of technical problem. Max Weber, an eminent German sociologist, describes it as a system of administration characterized by expertness, impartiality and the absence of humanity. Bureaucracy is a feature of all large-scale undertakings, public or private. Its main features may be summarized as follows: to seek the guidance and help from political executive and also higher echelons of administration. Next, to resist uncalled for pressures of the politicians, social leaders, interest groups and citizens. Next, to have a clear understanding of the policy statements, its goals and objectives. Next, to have a thorough understanding of the target area and groups where and for whom the policy formulated is to be executed. This would help them to adopt the most suitable strategy for policy execution. Next, to prioritize the works to be undertaken, to list the manpower, financial and infrastructural requirements for executing a policy. Next, to ask for more resources if required. Next, to allocate human, financial and physical resources out of the available provided ones. Next, to educate the masses regarding policy benefits and limitations of agency in seeking their cooperation. Next, to form public opinion through formal and informal channels. Next, to ensure effective monitoring and evaluation. And last, to develop a feeling of trust for the political executive, politicians and citizens. Next, coming to the role in policy formulation. Due to the major information-based knowledge and experience, permanent service and advisory expertise possessed by the bureaucrats in policy matters, it makes them instrumental in the formulation of public policy. The major role in the policy formulation part of the policy cycle of Indian bureaucrats is that of the middle level ones, ranks 3 and 4 from the top, who are actively engaged in the above activity. They are the ones who fill in details to the draft skeletons provided to them passed by the legislature. Their proposals are then scrutinized by the top level bureaucrats who are closer to the ministers, who may accept them with or without alternation or resend it to them for changes, adjustments, etc. However, at times these top level bureaucrats perform the duties of executor as well, where they themselves correct the drafts proposed to them by their subordinates and then pass it on to the minister for approval. Next, coming to the role in policy implementation and monitoring. Machinery is developed and bureaucracy is strengthened to implement the selected policy, and every aspect of the same is taken care of, like getting the knowledgeable and skilled personnel, proper organizational and infrastructural setup and technology, technical and financial aid. Decision making is done at every stage to choose the best alternative out of available ones by the administrators while carrying out the tasks allocated to each. Mid-term appraisals are held of policy development. Senior officers keep monitoring and directing the juniors at every stage of policy implementation to make it error-free. Limitations are bureaucratic nepotism, red tapeism, etc., and rigid behavior of administrators, lack of expertise and knowledge, lack of funds and infrastructure, and citizens not being cooperative. Role in policy education. People or target groups are made aware of the objectives of the policies and how it will be of help to them now and in the future. Their support is garnered so that implementation is smooth without any roadblocks. This will also help in increasing participation of people in the policy process to provide their own expertise. This helps in the decision making of the administrators as well and helps in improving or bettering the policy implementation at the same time so that there is no conflict at a later stage. Limitations are lack of trust of people in bureaucracy, hostile attitude between both parties, etc. Second, role in policy evaluation and review. In order to determine the success and failure of any policy, this step is necessary. Policy evaluation is weighed in many ways like cost benefit, welfare of the people, achievement of goals and objective set, etc. The legislature, bureaucracy, judiciary through its powers of judicial review and voluntary and non-profit organizations and associations play a huge role in policy evaluation. Policy studies help in reviewing the policies and improving them. Limitations are lack of will, lack of resources, data issues, ambiguous policy statements, equity or economical dilemma, etc. Next, coming to the implementation techniques. The choice and adaptation of implementation techniques have a definite bearing on policy performance. An implementation schedule is of critical importance. It is generally recognized that the policy and programs do not implement themselves and that specific techniques must be used if policy programs are sought to be translated into realities. An implementation strategy needs therefore to provide for necessary controls on staffing, costs and timing. The role of implementing agency during the course of implementation needs to be clearly understood by all, particularly where it involves the monitoring and evaluation of progress. An effective implementation strategy must provide for implementation techniques. Albert Watterson offers a number of broad-based approaches. The first concerns itself with creating the necessary conditions for implementation. Secondly, attention needs to be paid to bridging the gaps which frustrate implementation. The programming structure should be established in executive organization with capable and trained staff. Thirdly, policy or programming progress must be continuously evaluated because changing conditions result in deviation from the intended policy designs. Fourthly, Prior analysis of policy is another approach for improving the implementation process. It facilitates time schedules and cost estimates to be set up as criteria against which to measure the progress of the policy or program. The time schedules and cost estimates also help to determine objectively the progress of the policy designs. Similarly, Williams suggests several techniques of demonstration and monitoring for improving implementation process. A small-scale demonstration exercise can generate useful information and work out operational units. Monitoring involves periodic site visits by program personnel to examine management practices and ensure staff capability. Planning, timing and scheduling are important techniques in the implementation process. Correct timing and effective scheduling of work constitute a necessary condition for successful performance. Among the techniques for timing and scheduling are a set of network techniques which include critical path method and the program evaluation and review technique. Charts are used to plan the implementation of the policy or project in scheduled calendar time and to show the progress achievement in relation to such a schedule. Conditions for successful implementation. Implementation is seen varying along a continuum ranging from successful to abort. Successful implementation involves many operations and procedures as well as time and resources. However, successful implementation should not be equated with impact measures, as implementation is not the same thing as impact. Sabatier and Mazmanian take an even bolder approach in an article published and identify 5 conditions for effective policy implementation. These are: first, the program is based on a sound theory relating changes in target group behavior to the achievements of the desired and state objectives. Second, the statutes or other basic policy decisions contain unambiguous policy directives and structures of the implementation process so as to maximize the likelihood that target groups will perform as desired. Third, the leaders of the implementation agencies possess substantial managerial and political skill and are committed to statutory goals. Fourth, the program is actively supported by organized constituency groups and by a few key legislators or the chief executive throughout the implementation process, with the courts being neutral or supportive. Fifth, the relative priority of statutory objectives is not significantly undermined over time by the emergence of conflicting public policies or by change in relevant socio-economic conditions that undermined the statute. Technical theory or political support. The argument put forward by these authors is that problems can be avoided by anticipating complications and difficulties in advance. But this assumes that implementation takes place in a static environment and in a politics-free world. But a policy to be implemented must be given concrete shape. In particular, the presumptions skate over the whole issues of consensus, either in a party political or ideological sense or in terms of organizational interests affected by policy. Chase says in an article that it is difficult to obtain compliance where policy or a program is to be implemented by agencies whose intentions do not necessarily coincide with those of the policy formulations. Solutions to this difficulty are therefore seen in terms of A. Gaining credibility, B. Reference to higher authority, and C. Financial incentives. Chase seems to ignore the relationship between interests, politics, and the power of balance among those making, implementing, and affected by the policy. The study of evaluation of the national policy in India illustrates the importance of setting guidelines and of administrative discretion in implementing policy. Any policy must be given clarity, concreteness. As a matter of fact, the further down the bureaucracy a policy goes, the more clarity is attached to details, requirements and guidelines. Any policy, in order to be administered, needs translation into procedures for compliance. Bureaucratic system has many merits and demerits. The politicians, who are the mainspring of the policy making work, are having more and more activities and have less time to perform some of the administrative functions. So, they delegated certain powers to their officials to take decisions and act immediately according to the importance and urgency of the problem. This power, in one way or other, gives important role to officials in policy formulation and policy implementation work. The bureaucrats in modern states play an important role in policy formulation, policy implementation and general administration. Define the term public policy and discuss the environmental factors influencing public policy. Second, discuss the role of bureaucracy in policy making process. Third, explain the conditions needed for successful implementation of public policies.